The rain poured down in thick sheets, drumming against the roof of my car. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The headlights barely cut through the darkness, but I could see him, standing in the middle of the road. Max. Soaked, shivering, and staring straight at me. I slammed on the brakes, tires screeching against the wet pavement. My heart pounded. It couldn't be real. It had been 6 years. 6 years since he was taken from me, since that horrible night. But there he was. I threw open the door, stepping into the storm. "Max?" My voice cracked, barely audible over the rain. He didn't move. Then, his ears flicked. His tail gave the slightest wag. A broken sob escaped my lips as I rushed forward, but before I could reach him, something moved in the shadows behind. Him, a silhouette. A figure stepped closer, their face obscured by the rain. A voice, low and chilling, sliced through the storm. "It wasn't supposed to be you." And then, darkness. 6 years earlier, Max had been my whole world. I was just a kid, barely 12, and he was my best friend. A German shepherd with golden brown, fur, and the kind of loyalty that felt unbreakable. We were inseparable, until the night he disappeared. It happened so fast. One moment, he was running beside me in the backyard, chasing fireflies under the moonlight. The next, he was gone. I searched everywhere, called his name until my throat was raw. My parents said he must have run away, but I knew better. I felt it. Someone took him. No one believed me. But then the letters started showing up. Scraps of paper tucked under my window at night. No handwriting, just blocky letters cut from magazines. Forget the dog. It's safer this way. Stop looking. But I never did. For years, I tried to move on. I told myself he was gone, that I'd never see him again. Then, last week, I got a message, a single text from an unknown number. "Max is waiting." Attached was a picture, dark and grainy, but unmistakable. My dog, standing outside an old abandoned house, the same collar, the same deep brown eyes. I barely slept that night. I had to find him. So here I was, standing in the pouring rain, face to face with the impossible. Max took a step forward, his paws splashing in a shallow puddle. But something was wrong. His body tensed, his ears flattened, his eyes, once so warm, flickered with something off. Behind him, the figure stepped closer. "You should have left it alone." A flash of lightning illuminated their face, and my world shattered. It was my father. My throat tightened. My legs locked in place. "Dad?" He didn't answer, just looked, past me, into the darkness beyond the road. I turned, just in time to see headlights. A truck, barreling straight toward us. Max lunged, and then impact. When I woke up, everything was still. The rain had stopped. The night was eerily silent. Pain throbbed in my skull as I pushed myself up. The truck was gone. So was my father. But Max, he lay beside me, breathing heavily. His fur was damp, matted with dirt. I reached out, fingers shaking, brushing against his scarred muzzle. Tears blurred my vision. "You came back," his tail gave. A weak thump. I didn't know the truth yet. Why my father had taken him. Why he had sent those letters. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Max was home. The night was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves as the wind whispered through the trees. The dim glow of a flickering street lamp barely illuminated the entrance of Maplewood Animal Shelter, casting long, shifting shadows across the rain-slick pavement. It was just past midnight, a time when most of the world had succumbed to sleep. But inside the shelter, a restless German shepherd lay curled up in the corner of his kennel, his golden brown eyes fixed on the entrance, as if he were waiting for someone, or something. Then it happened. The soft creak of the shelter's front gate sent a shiver through the air. A small, hooded figure slipped through the gap, moving cautiously yet deliberately toward the row of kennels. The faint crunch of gravel under delicate footsteps echoed unnaturally loud in the silence. The security cameras blinked, capturing glimpses of a young girl, no older than 8 or 9, her face partially obscured by the oversized hoodie draped over her tiny frame. She shouldn't be here. The shelter was closed for the night. No visitors, no staff, just the dogs and the faint hum of the ventilation system. Yet, there she was. She walked past kennel after kennel, her gaze searching, determined. Dogs stirred in their cages, some rising on their paws, others merely flicking their ears. Some barked softly, but the girl didn't flinch. It was as if she had done this before, as if she belonged here. And then she stopped, her eyes locked onto a particular kennel, the one at the far end where the German Shepherd lay motionless, his head resting on his paws. For a long moment, neither of them moved. It was as though they were communicating in silence, a quiet understanding passing between them. Then, ever so gently, she dropped to her knees and whispered through the cold metal bars. "No one heard what," she said. But whatever it was, it made the dog rise to his feet, ears perked, eyes alert. His tail didn't wag, nor did he bark. He simply stood there, staring at the girl with an expression that was almost knowing. And that's when the lights flickered, a sharp buzzing sound crackled through the air, and the shelter was plunged into darkness for just a split second. When the lights returned, the girl was gone. The kennel door was open, and the German Shepherd had vanished. The security footage would later reveal something even more chilling, something no one could explain. The girl had never touched the lock. Morning light streamed through the blinds of a small office, casting long streaks across the cluttered desk where stacks of paperwork sat untouched. Olivia Harper, the manager of Maplewood Animal Shelter, rubbed her temples as she sipped from a half-empty coffee cup. She had barely taken a sip when the door burst open. "Liv, you need to see this," came the urgent voice of Daniel, the shelter's night guard. His face was pale, his expression tense. Olivia frowned. "What is it now?" Wordlessly, Daniel handed her a tablet, his fingers trembling slightly as he pressed play on the security footage. The grainy, black-and-white video flickered to life, showing the young girl slipping through the shelter gates in the dead of night. Olivia's eyes widened as she watched the child move with an eerie sense of purpose, stopping only in front of a single kennel, the one holding a German Shepherd named Shadow. Then came the part that sent a chill down her spine. The girl whispered, "Something." Shadow rose, his posture changing instantly. The footage flickered, and in the next frame the kennel door stood wide open. Both the girl and the dog were gone. "How?" Olivia's voice trailed off. Daniel swallowed. "The locks weren't broken. There was no forced entry. It's like the door just opened on its own." A cold silence hung between them. Olivia's grip tightened around the tablet as she replayed the video. She knew every dog in this shelter, but Shadow was different. He wasn't like the others. He had been found 3 months ago, wandering the outskirts of town, his coat matted, ribs protruding, a collar with no tag, a haunted look in his eyes. He refused to interact with anyone, barely ate, and spent most of his time staring at the walls of his kennel. Yet, the moment that girl whispered to him, everything changed. Olivia set the tablet down. "We need to find them. Now." The morning air was crisp as Olivia and Daniel stepped outside, scanning the streets beyond the shelter's gates. The town of Maplewood was small, and a missing dog, especially one as large as Shadow, wouldn't go unnoticed for long. "Where do we even start?" Daniel muttered, rubbing his arms against the cold. Olivia took a deep breath, glancing down at the tablet one last time. The girl. She was the key. But who was she? And why did Shadow follow her? Let's check the nearby streets first, Olivia said. Maybe someone saw something. They split up, asking shopkeepers, early risers, and dog walkers if they had seen a girl with a German shepherd. But no one had. Just as Olivia was about to call it a lost cause, a voice called out from behind. "You looking for that dog?" She turned to see an elderly woman standing by the entrance of a small bakery. "German shepherd, right?" the woman continued. "Saw one heading toward the old train yard earlier. He was with a little girl." Olivia's stomach tightened. The train yard. It had been abandoned for years, a dangerous place for a child to be wandering alone. Without another word, she and Daniel hurried back to the shelter's van, their hearts pounding. As Daniel drove, Olivia's thoughts raced. Who was that girl? Why? Had Shadow followed her so willingly when he had spent months refusing to trust anyone? And most importantly, what were they walking into? As the van sped toward the train yard, Olivia couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping up her spine. The van rumbled over cracked pavement as Olivia and Daniel neared the abandoned train yard. The once busy station was now a forgotten relic. Rusted. Tracks, shattered windows, and crumbling platforms covered in weeds. A chilling silence hung over the place, broken only by the distant creak of an old metal sign swaying in the wind. Daniel cut the engine. "This place gives me the creeps," he muttered. Olivia ignored him, her eyes scanning the desolate yard. "If the girl and Shadow are here, we need to find them fast." They stepped out of the van, their footsteps echoing against the hollow silence. The deeper they went, the stronger Olivia's unease grew. Something wasn't right. A faint sound. Carried through the air, a low, almost imperceptible whimper. Olivia froze. "Did you hear that?" Daniel nodded, his posture tense. Following the sound, they stepped past rusted train cars and debris, finally stopping in front of an old storage shed with a padlock hanging loosely from the latch. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, the whimpering grew louder. Olivia pushed the door open, her heart hammering in her chest. Dust swirled in the dim light, revealing a scene that sent a chill down her spine. There, in the farthest corner of the shed, sat the little girl. Shadow was curled around her protectively, his ears pinned back, his body tense. But it wasn't just them. Near the girl's feet lay a small bundle wrapped in a tattered blanket. It trembled slightly, letting out another soft cry. Olivia stepped closer, realization sinking in. It wasn't a bundle. It was a newborn puppy, barely clinging to life. The girl looked up, her eyes filled with something Olivia couldn't quite place: desperation and fear. "Please," the girl whispered, her voice barely audible. "You have to help him." A sudden rustling outside made Daniel whip around. Olivia turned too, a cold shiver racing down her spine. They weren't alone. A sharp gust of wind rattled the broken windows of the shed, sending dust swirling through the air. Olivia's breath hitched as she exchanged a glance with Daniel. His posture had stiffened, his hand instinctively reaching for the flashlight clipped to his belt. The rustling outside grew louder. Shadow let out a low, warning growl, positioning himself between the girl and the door. His fur bristled, his ears pinned back in alarm. Olivia crouched beside the girl, her voice gentle but firm. "Who else is here?" The girl hugged the shivering puppy tighter, eyes darting toward the entrance. "They followed us." Before Olivia could ask who they were, a heavy thud echoed from just beyond the door. Then another. Daniel edged closer, gripping a rusted metal rod from the corner of the shed. "Who's out there?" he called. Silence. Then, bang! The door burst open, slamming against the wall. A figure loomed in the doorway, backlit by the harsh morning light. A man. His clothes were ragged, his face unshaven. His bloodshot eyes locked onto the girl and the bundle in her arms. "There you are," he rasped, stepping forward. His voice was hoarse, laced with something that made Olivia's skin crawl. "I told you not to run," the girl whimpered, shrinking, back against Shadow, who let out a deep, guttural snarl. The shepherd's hackles rose, his muscles coiled like a spring ready to snap. Daniel tightened his grip on the rod. "Back off," he warned, the man's lips curled into a sneer. "That's my dog," he said, nodding toward Shadow. "And that pup, that's mine too." Olivia's stomach twisted. She glanced at the girl, whose fingers clutched desperately at the tiny, frail creature in her arms. "No," the girl whispered, her voice shaking. "He's not yours. You hurt them." The man's face darkened. "I own them, and I'll do whatever I want with them." He took another step forward, and that's when Shadow lunged. Shadow launched forward, teeth bared, a deep snarl ripping through the air. The man barely had time to react before the German shepherd's powerful body slammed into him, sending him stumbling backward. He let out a startled yell, arms flailing as he crashed against the rusted doorway. The girl gasped, clutching the puppy tighter. Olivia grabbed her wrist and pulled her back. "Stay behind me," she whispered. The man struggled to regain his footing, his eyes burning with fury. "Call off, your damn mutt," he snarled. But Shadow didn't back down. He stood firm, blocking the entrance, his entire body radiating unwavering protection. Daniel moved forward, keeping the metal rod raised. "You need to leave. Now." The man's chest heaved with anger, but he must have seen the determination in their eyes, the readiness in Shadow's stance, because after a tense moment he spat onto the ground and took a step back. "This isn't over," he growled before, turning and disappearing into the maze of abandoned train cars. The moment he was gone, Olivia let out a shaky breath and turned to the girl. "Are you okay?" The child nodded, though tears shimmered in her eyes. She looked down at the puppy in her arms, stroking its tiny head. "He would have hurt them again. Shadow saved us." Olivia crouched beside her. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The girl hesitated. Then, in a small voice, she said, "Lena." Olivia smiled gently. "Lena, how do you know Shadow?" Lena glanced at the dog, who had relaxed slightly but remained close. He found me," she whispered. "A few weeks ago, I was sleeping, behind a store. It was so cold, and I didn't have anywhere to go. Then he showed up." She rubbed Shadow's ear, her voice softening. "He laid next to me all night to keep me warm. He didn't leave." Olivia's throat tightened. Daniel shifted beside her. "You've been on your own this whole time?" Lena nodded. "And then I found the puppy. He was in a cage behind that man's house. He was sick. I knew I had to take him." Her lip trembled. "But he followed me. He wanted to take him back." A lump formed in Olivia's throat as she processed the girl's words. This child had been surviving on her own, with nothing but a stray dog protecting her. Shadow huffed softly, pressing his nose against Lena's arm, as if reassuring her that she was safe now. For the first time, Lena smiled. Olivia exhaled and made a decision. "We're taking you both somewhere safe." Olivia helped Lena to her feet, her mind racing. This wasn't just about rescuing a stray dog anymore. Lena was in danger, and that man wasn't going to stop looking for her or the puppy. "We need to get out of here," Olivia said, glancing at Daniel. "Now." Daniel nodded and led the way back to the van. Shadow stayed close to Lena, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. Even as they moved quickly through the abandoned train yard, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Just as they reached the van, tires screeched in the distance. A black pickup truck tore down the road, stopping just outside the yard's chain-link fence. Olivia's breath caught as she recognized the man from earlier. Only now, he wasn't alone. 2 other men stepped out of the truck, both rough-looking, both radiating the same dangerous energy. Daniel cursed under his breath. "They came back," Lena whimpered, pressing closer to Shadow. The dog let out a low growl, his body tense. The man from earlier smirked, resting a hand on the truck door. "You think you can just take what's mine," he called out. "That dog, both of them, belong to me." Olivia's hands clenched into fists. "They don't belong to anyone, especially not you." The man's smirk faded. "Get out of the way." "No." A muscle twitched in his jaw. He turned to the other men, giving a slight nod. One of them reached into the truck. A sickening click echoed in the air as he pulled out a crowbar. The other cracked his knuckles. Daniel took a step forward, his grip tightening on the metal rod he had picked up earlier. Olivia's pulse pounded in her ears. This was about to turn ugly. Then, without warning, Shadow lunged, but not at the men. Instead, he leaped at Lena, knocking her to the ground just as something small and dark whizzed through the air. A knife. It buried itself into the wooden fence post behind them, exactly where Lena had been standing. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then, chaos erupted. Time seemed to slow. The metallic clang of the knife against the fence echoed in Olivia's ears as her breath caught in her throat. Shadow stood over Lena, his body tense, his sharp eyes locked onto the man who had thrown the blade. The attacker cursed under his breath, reaching for something else in his jacket. Daniel reacted instantly, stepping in front of Olivia and Lena. "Get in the van, now!" he barked. Olivia grabbed Lena's arm, pulling her toward the van's open door. But Lena hesitated, clutching the shivering puppy. "What about Shadow?" she cried. Shadow wasn't moving. He remained planted between them and the men, his teeth bared, growling so deeply it sent chills through Olivia's spine. The man who had thrown the knife took a step forward, raising his hand again, and Shadow attacked. The German shepherd launched himself at the man with stunning speed. The attacker barely had time to react before Shadow's powerful jaws clamped down on his forearm, sending him crashing to the ground with a pained scream. The other two men panicked. One lunged for Shadow, but Daniel swung his metal rod, landing. A solid hit against the man's side. He crumpled to the ground with a groan. The ringleader, Lena's so-called owner, stumbled backward, his eyes wide with fear. "Call off that damn dog," he shouted. But Olivia saw something in Shadow's eyes, something fierce, unwavering. He wasn't going to stop, not until Lena was safe. The attacker wrestled against Shadow's grip, his screams growing louder. Finally, he managed to yank himself free, scrambling backward. Blood dripped from his torn sleeve. "This isn't over," he spat, his voice shaking. "You have no idea who you're messing with." Then, without another word, he and his men staggered toward their truck, revving the engine before speeding away, dust and gravel kicking up in their wake. Silence. Lena was trembling in Olivia's arms, clutching the tiny puppy to her chest. Daniel exhaled heavily, lowering his makeshift weapon. That was too close. Olivia knelt beside Shadow, who stood panting, his tongue lolling from the side of his mouth. "You saved us," she whispered, stroking his fur. "Again." Shadow let out a soft huff, then turned toward Lena. Carefully, he nuzzled her, as if checking if she was okay. Lena wiped her teary eyes and threw her arms around his neck. "You're my hero," she whispered into his fur, and for the first time since they had found her, Lena smiled. But Olivia knew this wasn't over. Whoever those men were, they wouldn't just walk away. And that meant Shadow, Lena, and the tiny puppy were in more danger than ever. The van rumbled down the empty road, the weight of the night's events pressing heavily on everyone inside. Olivia kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the black pickup truck tailing them, but the road remained clear. Lena sat curled up in the back seat, her arms wrapped tightly around the tiny puppy. She hadn't said much since. They had escaped, but her grip on the little creature hadn't loosened. Shadow lay beside her, his massive frame stretched out protectively, his head resting on her lap. Every now and then he would lift his eyes to check on her, as if reassuring himself that she was safe. Daniel sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. We need to figure out what to do next. Olivia nodded. We can't take her back to the shelter. Those men, whoever they are, they'll come looking. She glanced at Lena. And if they find her, Lena's small fingers curled into Shadow's fur. I don't want to go back, she whispered. Olivia's heart clenched. This girl had no home, no family, and the only ones who had ever protected her were the 2 dogs beside her. Shadow let out a soft whine and nudged her hand. Lena sniffled, wiping her eyes before hugging him tightly. Daniel tapped his fingers against the dashboard, deep in thought. I have a friend. Works with child services. He's one of the good ones. We can explain the situation, get Lena somewhere, safe. Lena stiffened. Will they take Shadow away from me? Olivia hesitated. She knew how these things worked. A child with no legal guardian would be placed in the system, and a stray dog, no matter how heroic, would be sent to a shelter. There was no guarantee they'd end up together. No, Olivia said firmly. We won't let that happen. Lena's wide, tear-filled eyes locked onto hers. Promise? Shadow lifted his head, his golden brown eyes watching Olivia closely, as if he, too, was waiting for an answer. Olivia reached over and gently squeezed Lena's hand. I promise. Lena exhaled shakily and leaned her head against Shadow's back. The German shepherd let out a soft huff, pressing closer to her, seeky eyes. They drove on. Olivia's mind raced with possibilities. Maybe there was another way, another option where they could stay together. One thing was certain. Lena and Shadow had fought too hard to be separated now, and Olivia wasn't about to let that happen. The sun was beginning to rise, casting golden light over the quiet countryside as the van pulled into Olivia's driveway. The long night was finally over, but Olivia knew the fight wasn't. Lena was already half asleep, curled against Shadow's warm fur, the tiny puppy tucked safely in her arms. Shadow had refused to leave her side the entire ride back, his protective instincts stronger than ever. Daniel turned off the engine and sighed. We made it. Olivia glanced at Lena, then at Shadow. She had seen plenty of bonds between people and animals before, but this was something different. This was unbreakable. She turned to Daniel. Your friend in child services? We'll talk to him. But if there's any chance of keeping them together, we take it. Daniel nodded. Agreed. Lena stirred, rubbing her tired eyes. Where are we? She mumbled. Olivia smiled softly. Home. For now. Lena blinked at her as if trying to decide whether it was real. Then, without a word, she wrapped her arms around Olivia in a tight hug. Thank you, she whispered. Shadow wagged his tail, stepping closer and pressing his cold nose against Olivia's palm. She laughed softly, scratching behind his ears. Looks like I've got 2 new house guests, Daniel chuckled. 3, actually. He gestured to the tiny puppy nestled against Lena. Olivia sighed, shaking her head. I guess we'll need more dog food. Lena giggled, the first real laugh Olivia had heard from her. It was soft, hesitant, but full of something she hadn't had in a long time. Hope. Shadow let out a content sigh and laid down beside Lena, his body relaxing for the first time. No more running. No more fighting. For the first time in a long time, they were safe. And no matter what happened next, Olivia knew one thing for certain. They were never going to be apart again. Have you ever witnessed an unbreakable bond between a human and an animal? Share your thoughts below. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.